Hey, I'm Amber. Welcome to Grace Walk Farm. Today, I'm really excited to share a new recipe with you for gluten-free sandwich bread. Now, my family has been on a gluten-free journey for almost a year now. With so many issues surrounding gluten in our house, we just went completely gluten-free for everybody, and figuring out how to find good sandwich bread has been a chore. Most gluten-free bread on the market, number one, it tastes like cardboard. It's not a good experience. Number two, those pieces are like this big. They're tiny. They're not big enough for a full sandwich. And as a busy mom with busy teenagers, I need easy sandwich bread that won't make my family sick. So I set out on a quest to figure out how to make good gluten-free bread. And here is the recipe that I've landed on, and I love it. I got rave reviews from my husband and my kids the first time I tried this recipe. We've now made 3 different loaves. Every single one has turned out amazing. So I thought it's time to make a video and share this recipe with the rest of the world in case some other gluten-free moms like me could use the help. So let's jump right in. Let's talk about how to make this bread. We're gonna need 3 main mixes. We're gonna have a dry mix, a wet mix, and a yeast mix. So let's start with our yeast mix. We're gonna need a small bowl, and you're gonna need 1.5 cups of milk. Now I'm using almond milk because we're a dairy-free family as well. We have lots of food allergies around here, unfortunately. But you could use regular cow milk. You could also use coconut milk. That works really well. Or you can do almond milk. Any kind of milk will do. All right, and we want to heat this up just enough to make it warm. We don't want it hot, just warm, so it will activate our yeast. So I'm gonna stick this in the microwave for 1 minute just to warm my milk, and then we'll come back and I'll show you what to do next. Okay, I have 1.5 cups here of warmed almond milk. It's not hot. You want to temperature test it. It's just warm, which is perfect. Now to that, we're going to add a tablespoon of instant yeast or rapid rise yeast. 1 tablespoon, and just sprinkle that right on top of the milk. And then we're also going to add some honey. And that honey is going to help our yeast to bloom. So I'm going to do 4 tablespoons of honey. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Ooh. We try not to make a mess, but I usually do with honey. And we're just going to stir this together. Let our yeast start to dissolve in that warm milk and honey mixture. And what you should start to see are some little bubbles as your yeast begins to proof or bloom. So foaming, bubbles, those are all good signs. So once we've mixed that, we are just going to set it to the side and let it bloom for about 5 or 10 minutes while we work on the rest of our bread mix. Now let's work on our dry ingredients. So first thing you're gonna need is flour. Now, gluten-free flours is a subject we can do a whole video on, right? There's lots of options out there. I've tried lots of different things. I have found that for bread, you definitely need a mix that includes xanthan gum, or you're gonna need to add your own xanthan gum. So my favorite is the King Arthur Measure for Measure flour. This blend works really well for any kind of baking. This is what I use for cakes, cookies, pie crust, really anything. But for bread, it had not really been a winner until I figured out that I needed to add some things to it. So this particular blend has rice flour, sorghum flour, potato starch, and tapioca starch, and then it also has xanthan gum in it. So we're going to add 3 cups of flour to our bowl. And this is going to serve as the base for our bread. There's 2. Canister is getting a little low here. All right. just use the rest of it. That should be pretty close. And then to our 3 cups of flour, we need to add 4 teaspoons of baking soda. Or baking powder, I mean, not soda. We want baking powder. So we're gonna do 4 teaspoons of baking powder. You'll see this recipe comes together really quickly. I mean, 15 minutes or so and you're done. And it's just gotta bake from there. So it's pretty quick and easy to make this bread, which is a perk in my book. Then I'm gonna add a 1.5 teaspoons of salt. I use Redmond's pink salt for everything. Love pink salt. And that's it. So 3 cups of flour, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, and then if your flour blend doesn't have xanthan gum, you need to add 1.5 teaspoons of xanthan gum at this point. So we're gonna give that a mix, and now our dry mixture is done. And you may hear the dogs behind me. They're drinking water. They've been out running around playing. They must have been thirsty. All right, so for this next part, we're gonna use our KitchenAid mixer. It just makes this part easy. So for our wet ingredients, we're gonna start with 2 eggs. And I always crack my eggs in a separate bowl, just in case I find a bad egg in the bunch, so we don't ruin a whole batch of bread batter. And 2 eggs is plenty for, this is gonna make 1 loaf of bread. And then to the 2 eggs, we're gonna add a 1/4 cup of olive oil. Now you could also use coconut oil, you could use avocado oil, just whatever you like, but I'm going to use olive oil because that's just what I happen to have on hand today. And the final ingredient, eggs, olive oil, and we need 2 teaspoons of apple cider vinegar, which seems like a really strange thing to add to bread, but when you're baking gluten-free, apple cider vinegar just makes it lighter and fluffier and gives you a better finished product. I'm sure there is a chemical reason for that. I am not a food scientist. I'm just a busy mom showing you what works for me. So, a little splash of apple cider vinegar, and then we're gonna mix our wet ingredients. And so we're just blending that up real quickly. And then we're gonna add in our yeast mixture. So here, I don't know if you can see it, it's a little bubbly, it's definitely ready. This is our milk, honey, and yeast. We're gonna pour that in with our other wet ingredients. Just gonna scrape the last little bit of honey out of the bottom of that bowl. And I know 4 tablespoons of honey, you may think, is this gonna be sweet? It really isn't. This is not a sweet bread. I think it comes out to be real similar to any other white sandwich bread, really. We're just gonna mix that in with our other wet ingredients. And now we're ready for our dry blend. So this is our flour and our baking powder and our salt. And we're gonna just start to incorporate that slowly, just a little at a time, and let it mix in. And when this comes together, this is not going to be a traditional bread dough. This is going to look more like a batter, like a cake batter. And that's okay. With gluten-free bread, the structure of everything is different. So we're gonna pour this batter into a loaf pan, let it rise for about 30 minutes, and then bake it. And that's it. Easy peasy, gluten-free bread. I'm gonna turn it up for just a minute, get it all mixed. And that looks pretty good. All right, let's grab a loaf pan and get it ready for the oven. So I typically prefer to use my stoneware pan for baking bread, but I actually already have a loaf baking that I started earlier this morning. And so for this loaf, I'm gonna just use a regular metal pan. So what we're gonna do, grab a rubber spatula here. We're just gonna spread this in our loaf pan. I'm gonna pour it right on in. And After our batter is in the loaf pan, we're gonna cover this and we're gonna let it rise. And because we use the fast yeast or the rapid rise yeast, we actually won't even need that long of a rise. Probably 20-30 minutes. Like typically what I'll do is I'll let it rise while my oven preheats. And by the time the oven's preheated, it'll be risen enough. You really just want it to rise enough to reach the top of your pan. You don't want it to get too tall. So here's our loaf. You smooth the top out. And we're gonna go set this in a warm place and cover it with a tea towel. We're gonna let it rise for about 20 minutes. We'll come check it in about 20 minutes and I'll bring you back and I'll show you what it looks like, and then we'll put it in the oven and give it a bake. So here you see I've got one that has almost finished rising, and I've got one that's baking. Look how good that looks. So there is our bread fresh out of the oven. Hear that hard crust? It looks good. So we're gonna let it cool, and then we'll take it out of the pan and slice it here in a little while.
So you want honest reaction?
Honest reaction.
So it's the best bread you've made that's gluten-free and dairy-free. It's a tiny bit crumbly, but if you cut it a little bit thicker, it's excellent. And considering we always eat gluten-free bread from the store and the slices are like this wide,
Yeah.
this is excellent because as you can see, that's a big old piece of bologna. So I'd give it 10 out of 10.
Nice. 10 out of 10. Good size. All right. What do you think?
I think it's very good, and it doesn't have to be toasted to taste good, which is another plus.
Nice.
Do you want to see that recipe one more time, maybe up close? I'm making another loaf, so I thought I would show you the exact process for how to do this if you want to make this bread by hand without a mixer of any kind. So we're going to start here with 1.5 cups of warm milk. I'm using almond milk, and you see me adding 4 tablespoons of honey. We're going to mix the honey into the milk just enough to incorporate it, and then we'll add some yeast. Now you'll see that I'm using a active dry yeast. This is rapid rise yeast, which means it's going to go a little quicker. So you want a rapid rise yeast. Next we'll make our dry mixture. That's going to be 3 cups of flour, and I'm using the King Arthur measure for measure flour. It includes xanthan gum, so I didn't have to add that. Now we'll add 4 teaspoons of baking powder. And remember, make sure your baking powder is good and hasn't expired. And then a teaspoon of pink salt, and that's it. Mix that up and our dry ingredients are ready. Now our wet. So we're gonna need 2 eggs, and that is the base of our wet mixture. Eggs play an important role in this bread recipe, so don't leave them out. And then to our eggs, we're going to add 1/4 cup of oil. So you see me here using olive oil. You can also use coconut oil or avocado oil, whatever you like. And then finally, we're gonna add 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. And I didn't measure that, I just added a little bit. And then you see I'm pouring the yeast mixture with our milk and our honey into our wet ingredients. So now everything is combined. That's a wet ingredient. and we'll start to add in our flour and our baking powder. So take this slowly, stir a little at a time. You see here I switched to a whisk. A fork wasn't going to quite cut it. And I'm just giving this a good stir to get all the clumps broken up. I want that flour very well incorporated in the mix here. And then you'll see here in a second I'll add the rest of the flour and we'll get that mixed in as well. As you mix this together, you really want it to come together almost like a thick pancake batter. It's really going to be a little thicker than pancake batter, but it's definitely not going to be as solid as like a ball of dough. So just keep mixing, and as soon as all that flour is well incorporated, you're pretty much done. And you'll see the dough kind of starts to come together away from the sides and stick together. This is the perfect consistency. That's exactly what we want. And it turned out that the plastic whisk did a really good job of this. So I may not drag out my big KitchenAid mixers often for bread baking now after seeing how easy this was. So now we're going to fill our loaf pan. I love using a stoneware pan. And you want to fill it no more than 3/4 of the way full to leave room for a rise. You don't want the bread to rise over the top. And then make sure you smooth out the top. Since we're working with a batter here, you need to have it smooth or it'll look a little strange when it comes out. Cover it with a towel and let it rise. And there you have it. There is our loaf of beautiful gluten-free sandwich bread. And we mixed it by hand. No KitchenAid mixer needed. You've seen both methods in this video for using a mixer or working by hand to make beautiful gluten-free bread for your family. I hope you enjoy it.